prioritize your health, prioritize physical activity, prioritize a nutritious diet, and a calorie deficit is going to work if you are interested in fat loss. And try to ignore the noise. I know it can be difficult, but like I said, if it sounds extreme or like a magic fix, that is a red flag.
So Dr. Colenso-Semple, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. I have been a fan of your work on social media, and I love that you're providing some research-backed information for women, especially my listeners, on what we were talking about, the Wild West of social media. And so I'd love to get into some myths and some research-backed data so that our listeners can walk away today feeling a little more empowered about the choices that they're going to make in terms of their health, nutrition, and fitness.
Sounds good.
Awesome. So can you share a bit about your background and what inspired you to focus on women's health, fitness, and physiology?
Yeah, after my undergrad, I had a corporate job, but I started working as a group fitness instructor and a personal trainer just for fun, really. And I've always been passionate about fitness. And as I became more and more entrenched in that industry, I was diving into the exercise science literature and becoming increasingly interested in muscle physiology. And ultimately, I decided to go back to school. And really, what was important to me in starting to do my own research was to study women, because what I noticed, especially in the resistance training or weightlifting type research, it was very skewed towards male participants, and there wasn't a ton at the time in women. So during my master's degree and then subsequently the research I did for my PhD, I wanted to try to bridge that gap and identify any sex-based differences if they existed.
Okay, wonderful. So there's a lot of buzz around, you can't build muscle after 40. And that in particular really stresses a lot of women out when you hear, you have all the muscle mass you're going to have by the time you reach this certain age, and you're going to reduce by a percentage each year until you basically wither away to nothing. So what does the research actually say about that?
So that sort of model that you refer to where it's, starting at 30 or starting at 40, you're losing muscle every year, that is modeled based on taking groups of people in each decade. So it's not actually following them over the lifespan. It's just kind of comparing people in their 20s, people in their 40s, people in their 80s, and it doesn't account for your physical activity. So this is of course, we know age and inactivity are going to drive the loss of muscle mass, and that's true in men and in women. But if we are lifting weights, then we are attenuating some of that loss.
Okay, so that's really interesting that the research is looking at different subsets. I mean, if you have physically active 20-year-olds, but you don't follow them all the way through their lifespan, you're not looking at what the impact is of resistance training and exercise.
That's right. And I mean, understand that in order to get as much data as you need to model that, I mean, it would be very difficult to get enough people and have them come back every 5 years forever. So it hasn't been done, and it hasn't been done because that's a really, really challenging study to do. So the next best thing is to kind of look at the different segments of the population, and then based on that, we can say, okay, it looks like people are losing muscle at this approximate rate.
So for women in their 40s and beyond, in midlife especially, I see on social media, cardio is bad, lifting weights is the only way to do it, wearing the weighted vest. Like, there's all these things out there that have women so confused. You have women, some of my clients have been lifelong runners, and now they're afraid that running their marathons is going to be more detrimental than beneficial. What can you say about that particular myth of what exercise should look like for midlife women?
Importantly, doing anything consistently is going to be highly, highly beneficial. So, and we're more likely to do something consistently if we enjoy it. So yes, there are definitely benefits to lifting weights, because we do know that if we don't, we start to lose muscle with age. It's also important for maintaining your bone health. So I encourage everyone to lift weights at least once a week. You don't have to do much for it to be beneficial. That aside, we as a society and an aging society are just not physically active enough, period. So if you love hiking or biking or swimming or running, whatever it is that you enjoy and will do consistently, please do it. It's going to be extremely beneficial. And any of these messages around cortisol or that, exercise is going to make you lose muscle, no. All exercise is good.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of women who I've worked with that said, if I incorporate 5 days of strength training a week, I have no time for my Zumba class, or I don't have any time to go out and kayak. And I feel like we're missing the big picture of enjoying physical activity. It's becoming just one more thing we have to check off a box of a day, it's a to-do list, instead of really finding movement to be pleasurable.
I totally agree with you. And I think when we are active in a way that doesn't feel like exercise, again, we're more likely to do that and have that be part of our life, because maybe it's, you like to go for a hike with friends, or maybe you have a Sunday morning running group and it's more of a social activity as well as a physical activity. So anything that makes exercise feel like a grind and something that you don't look forward to, then we need to kind of rethink, how could this be more enjoyable for me?
Okay. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot on social media is that walking is an underestimated and an undervalued form of exercise. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that in the sense that when we're walking, we're typically not thinking of it as structured exercise. So that means that we're just being more physically active in general, which is definitely beneficial. And you can go for a walk and listen to a podcast, or go for a walk and call a friend, or go for a walk with a friend. So there are ways that we can just incorporate more physical activity into our days. And that's particularly important if you live somewhere where it's a drive-in culture, and so you're just not really getting in much activity.
Okay, so now I've seen all the women walking out with their weighted vests. I want you to tell me your stance on the weighted vest, because now they're flying off of the Amazon shelves and hitting our doorsteps.
The messaging that weighted vests are beneficial for muscle and bone when it comes to walking with a weighted vest is very misleading. We have research looking at people wearing a weighted vest while exercising. So let's say they're doing lunges and squats and jumping wearing the weighted vest. And that can be beneficial because it's sort of a form of resistance training. Instead of holding dumbbells, you're wearing a weighted vest. The challenge with that is we want to progress over time. So let's say last month I was doing an exercise with 10-pound dumbbells. Maybe this month I can use 12-pound dumbbells. And it's harder to add that layer of progression with the weighted vest. But that said, exercising, lunges, squats, using the weighted vest as a resistance, that's a viable option. That's not the same as going for a walk. And what we see is walking is just not enough of a stimulus for muscle or for bone. And adding that weighted vest is not going to increase it further. We need a full, muscle contraction, or we need enough of an impact, a force applied to the bone for that to be effective. And we're just not getting that with walking with a weighted vest.
So if you're seeing that walking with a weighted vest is getting your heart rate up, would that be a considered beneficial aspect of wearing it versus thinking that you're going to be growing muscle mass?
So when people ask this, my response is always, what's the purpose of getting our heart rate up? Is it just for overall health? And, you've been told that if it's a more challenging walk, then it will be beneficial for, cardiovascular health. Maybe, but you could also walk on an incline, or go for a hike with some elevations, or walk faster and get those sort of same results. So when we think about what the target outcome is, often when I hear, I'm getting my heart rate up, then I think people think that translates to weight loss. And we have to be careful about making that leap, because what we see is, regardless of the type of exercise you're doing, whether it's walking or running or biking or lifting weights, the energy that we're expending from that isn't typically enough to move the needle substantially for weight loss. We really need to be looking at the diet.
So if we're going to switch gears to the diet, since you've mentioned that word, a lot of talk is around, it's not just as simple as calories in, calories out when you're in midlife. That doesn't work anymore. What's your feeling about calories in, calories out?
We have no data to suggest that this no longer exists. This is like thermodynamics. So if we're violating it, then, we have to rethink everything we know about science. It's true that during the menopause transition, sometimes women will experience body composition changes. So where you're storing fat might change. And this doesn't happen with everybody, but it does happen in some cases. And so the idea that, what you used to do isn't necessarily working, or your body is changing, there might be some truth to that, but it doesn't mean that a calorie deficit doesn't work. We know that it works. We know it works in men and women. We know it works in older people and younger people. We just need to make sure that we're actually in a calorie deficit. And the way I see a lot of women approach nutrition is these sort of popular diets that may or may not work, but if they work, it's because they put you in a calorie deficit. It's not because you started eating kiwis or you put flax seeds in your oatmeal.
There's so many things out there. And I think that one of the things that women that I have worked with, if they're adverse to tracking macros or scaling food or measuring portion sizes, they're really losing touch with how much, like what the calorie density is of a food, and just being conscious of things like a tablespoon of peanut butter is actually very calorie dense, or a handful of nuts. And what exactly is a handful of nuts? I think that sometimes with our American plates being as gigantic as they are, we're missing the mark on scaling our food properly.
I agree with you. I think we also tend to, if you have a partner, you tend to eat with your partner. And if your partner is a man who has a maintenance calorie level that is 3 times yours, then your portions should look different. And sometimes especially if we're going out to eat, then the portions aren't kind of scaled to what is appropriate for you and your metabolic rate and your body size. There is a sort of one size fits all type portion. So we need to keep that in mind as well when we think about how we are eating and that kind of portion size, and comparing it to those around us, because the calorie deficit that is required for you is going to be different than maybe for your friend or your husband.
So, in speaking of terms of maintenance versus calorie deficits and a surplus, what is your approach to those kind of calorie levels for women?
The best way to determine your maintenance calories is to start tracking your food and not change anything. And if your weight is stable, then this is your maintenance calories. There are these kind of loose heuristics, like take your body weight in pounds and multiply it by 15, and that should be approximately your maintenance calories, or multiply it by 12 or by 10, and then you're probably in a deficit. But these are, like I said, very loose, so they might not apply to you. And when we think about these women who are confident that they're doing everything right, but they're resistant to tracking some of these metrics, that can end up resulting in a really kind of frustrating feeling of spinning your wheels. And I understand that. And you definitely don't need to be in a place where you're tracking everything you put in your mouth forever. I don't think that's a good goal either. But as you said, it can be really helpful to understand, oh, this 10 almonds is 200 calories. And then, maybe we eat it anyway, but at least we're more aware. And once you're more aware and you stop tracking, that awareness stays with you when you're cooking and when you're eating out.
Yeah. Well, and a handful of nuts on a man is different than a handful of nuts on a woman, but it's still the same number of calories. So, if you're looking at a handful as a man and like, oh, this is just a handful. It's like, no, really, you should be counting like 10. That's actually technically more of a serving size than to just guesstimate it. And then, so when we talk about women and weight gain, and you talked about how the composition of women's bodies can change, a lot of the talk I'm seeing out there is around cortisol. And what cortisol does to weight gain and keeping the weight on. What kind of things have you found in the research about women and weight gain and cortisol?
Yeah, cortisol is really getting a bad rap online these days, but the truth is cortisol is actually a really important hormone. So we know it as the stress hormone, and it is, but it also helps regulate your blood pressure, your blood glucose, your immune function. So cortisol is involved in a lot of systems in the body. And we know that cortisol increases during exercise because exercise is a physiological stressor. And so it will increase, and then once you're done exercising, it'll come back down. And cortisol is also supposed to be naturally higher in the morning and lower in the evening before we go to bed. So all of these hormone fluctuations are really tightly regulated in the system. It's true that chronically elevated levels of cortisol is a problem that is associated with, a health concern that needs to be addressed. It's also true that if you have chronically low levels, then that's also a problem. But these short-term fluctuations are not something that we need to fear, and they're not contributing to our changes in body composition unless you are one of these people, a small percentage of people who have these serious underlying health conditions.
So, because I've also seen some women when they're under chronic stress and they have a prolonged, traumatic experience, or they're going through an illness of a family member or a divorce or something like that, some of the women will gain weight and some of them will lose weight. And so if you correlate cortisol to weight gain, that wouldn't really make sense, right?
Well, and in both of those situations, it's probably when some people are going through a really tough phase of life, then some of us tend to eat more because it makes us feel better, and others tend to say, oh, I couldn't possibly eat right now. And so like you're putting yourself in a surplus or a deficit depending on which route you go. And I think the problem with focusing on any one thing, certainly cortisol or insulin or whatever hormone we want to demonize today, it ignores the bigger picture. So we need to look at our diet, we need to look at our physical activity, we need to look at how we're sleeping, and we need to look at our overall stress, and then big picture, what's going on here. And I doubt all of those things are in check, and it's just the fact that your cortisol is increasing.
Yeah, I know. One of the other things that I've been seeing, and I saw it on your social media as well, is the discussion of intermittent fasting. And so, some women swear by intermittent fasting. It's been a game changer for them. Others say, then there's other sources that are saying, you can't exercise fasted. Intermittent fasting is the devil. Like there's so many things out there. What's your standpoint on intermittent fasting?
We have a good amount of data on this because initially people thought, based on some animal model studies, that maybe fasting was going to be this longevity game changer. And so there's a lot of research. It turns out not so much, but fasting can be a good tool to create a calorie deficit because you're shortening your feeding window. So if you're somebody who's not eating until 11 or 12, and then that feeding window is shorter, then perhaps that helps you consume fewer calories. So if you have a weight loss goal, then that can be a useful tool. There's nothing magic about it other than it can shorten the feeding window, create that calorie deficit. In terms of negative effects of fasted training, we do not see that. This has been, again, studied in men and in women, and you can gain muscle from fasted training. You can lose body fat from fasted training. These really aren't going to influence the results and the outcomes that we care about. It's just a function of a sufficient stimulus. So if we're thinking muscle growth, then we need to be lifting weights and it needs to be challenging. Liquid protein and calories. So if we're not eating enough, then of course that won't assist us with muscle growth. But provided you're eating, enough overall and you are getting that exercise stimulus, it doesn't matter if you're doing it on an empty stomach or not.
Okay. So I feel like I'm like firing questions at you. I'm sorry, but you just you're this wealth of knowledge that I'm just intrigued by all these things because I like I said, I feel like every time you scroll a different social media outlet, you've got different people telling you things, and a lot of times you do find that when you ask for research or you ask for data, they can't give you a study, or it's a study on rats, or it's a study on 5 people. And then it's, how does that become your control group when it's such a small population? So I find it very interesting.
Yeah, we need to be really honest as science communicators about what we're using to kind of back up our message, because it's important to look at the literature as a whole, not single studies. And it's important to communicate the nuance. And so a lot of the messaging going around online is framed as women should always do this or women should never do that. And that's a red flag because there's never a single solution to a problem. And this leads women to be so confused about what to do that they end up sort of disengaging from fitness because it just feels really overwhelming.
Yeah, I used to, before I started doing this, I was a coach for a program, and it was very specific, and I found that program worked really well for me, and I could dial it in, and you could tell me what to eat and tell me how to work out and tell me when to fast and all the things, and I was in good shape, and I lost fat, and I felt like my body composition was changing, but that isn't necessarily the case for everyone. And so once I went from adopting the program for my life to trying to adapt it to other women, it's really hard to have any kind of uniform program for everyone. And that's one of the things that really frustrates me when people are trying to say, like, what do you do as, a coach and a pharmacist? How do you help women? It's like, well, there's no real cookie cutter way to do it for anyone to feel successful. And so it can kind of feel like if you understand that it's not the same for everyone and there is a lot of data to really test out for a lot of different people, it can be frustrating because it's hard to sell that in a 7-second clip.
That's exactly right. And people who sell books, programs, diets, supplements, it is very much a kind of one size fits all marketing pitch. And we know individualization is really, really important. And if you're not meeting someone where they are, then we're not getting anywhere, because that's sort of step one to initiate any behavior change at all. They have to be actually ready to make that change, and that needs to fit their lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about was protein, because I feel like for the longest time, protein was getting added to everything. Like now there's flavorless protein powders, and, you throw cottage cheese into everything that you're making and you're adding protein to it. But then now I also feel like the pendulum is swinging into this like anti-protein. There's all these memes about like, what else can I throw protein into? And what do you feel the messaging should be for midlife women around protein?
We do see benefits when we bump it up from the RDA. So the RDA being 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight, and a pound is 2.2 kilograms. So when we go from the 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, we see improvements. And so it is worth making that bump. But that doesn't look like an insane amount of protein. And so you'll see some people recommending 1 gram per pound, which would be 2.2 grams per kilogram. That is very high. If you enjoy eating that much protein, that's totally fine. There are some women who say, well, protein is really satiating, and so it helps me to eat a really high protein diet because I'm trying to lose weight. That's fine. It's not harmful, but it's not necessary. And so really, for most people, if we are just consuming protein with each meal, a good source of protein with each meal, and if we struggle to do that, then adding a protein-rich snack or a protein shake is certainly viable, but we don't need to consume these sort of astronomical amounts of protein that some people are suggesting. And protein in and of itself doesn't build muscle. The stimulus for muscle building is lifting weights, and then the dietary protein kind of optimizes the results that we might get from that.
Okay, so let me go back and clear, like, this is where I think a lot of women get confused. So if you're talking about pounds and kilograms, that right there in and of itself. So if, a lot of people are saying 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight, but you're saying it's more like 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram.
Yes.
And how does that, so when people are thinking about their weight, if I weigh 100 pounds, how many kilograms is that for people? Like, sorry, I'm going to ask you to do the math, but just to kind of give people a frame of reference about how much protein this really is.
So if we're saying 1.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, then for somebody who is, let's say, 60 kilograms, then we're saying it's like 72 grams of protein. So if we think about, and when we think about an average weight woman, then let's say it's somewhere in the realm of 70 to 90 grams of protein per day on the high end. It could be less than that. Okay. So if we're breaking down, 20, 25 grams of protein per meal, then we're in a good place. And like I said, if we want to add in a protein-rich snack or a shake, then we've kind of covered our bases there. So, but it's really the benefit that we're getting from the 0.8 grams per kilogram bumping up to the 1.2. Okay.
So, because I've told women when we were trying to hit protein goals, and I will admit right now, I was probably overestimating the goal of protein that these women should be eating. And they kept saying, like, I can't add any more protein to my diet. This is like, if I eat one more chomp, I'm going to die, or like, how many hard-boiled eggs do you expect me to eat? We're really in saying, like, if you aimed for even 100 grams of protein, that's a lot of protein.
Yeah, that's probably more than enough. And, you'll hear a range of recommendations that, should it be 1. So I'm saying 1.2 as a minimum. Should it be 1.4? Should it be 1.6? You can make the argument that maybe there's but the biggest benefit is from getting up to 1.2. And so beyond that, we're also starting to get into the realm of grams of protein that aren't even necessarily trackable, because if I'm going to say, okay, this chicken breast is approximately 20 grams of protein, it could be 27 grams, it could be 17 grams, and then once I'm cooking it, and if I cut some of it off because I don't like that part, now I've changed. So we're not being exact about the protein, even if we're doing our very best to weigh and track everything. So I hear people get really stressed out about, well, should it be 100 grams or 110 grams? And it's like the margin for error there is such that it's not important, because even if you're really, really trying to eat 100 grams, you're probably some days eating more and some days eating less.
Yeah. And I think the fact that it's satiating and it helps people avoid going into that surplus of calories, because if you're eating lean protein and you're not having as high of fats, then you're cutting your calories, per your plate of food, if you're trying to watch a calorie deficit.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are plenty of ways to incorporate protein that are tasty, and they don't have to be kind of painful. You don't need to eat plain cottage cheese if you don't want to.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there's no way you couldn't even pay me to eat cottage cheese. I tried. I did the whole adding things to it, and then I thought to myself, life is too short to eat food that I don't want to eat just to hit a goal of protein. I'd rather have chicken or something.
Yeah, I will eat it, but I don't enjoy it. I will eat it because you don't have to prepare it. So it's there. You can just take a spoon and go for it. So there are days, if you're busy and you want high protein snacks, that, hey, you do what you got to do. But certainly it's not something that I eat on a regular basis.
Yeah. We all just need to find things that we're willing to eat or we love to eat, and then it makes it a lot easier to hit our nutrition goals. But if you're having any kind of nutrition deficits, what are some supplements that you would recommend women look at? And I know we'll probably say it's very individualized, but are there some general things that women are lacking in their nutrient profiles?
So if you're eating a well-rounded diet and you're getting in your micronutrients with a variety of fruits and vegetables, then it's unlikely that you have some of these deficiencies that people are taking supplements for, because it's important to understand that if we are supplementing, it's because we are assuming that something is low. And so we want to get it back up into a range that is normal, because not everything is kind of more is better, right? There are some micronutrients that if our levels are too high, that's actually bad as well. And so when we start to get into this, oh, I'll just take it just in case because it's all good, when you start doubling up on things like, oh, I'm taking a multivitamin and I'm supplementing with vitamin C and vitamin D, and there's probably already some of that in your multivitamin, and you might end up at worst just wasting your money because it's not actually doing anything for you. And at worst, there are circumstances where it can be harmful. So if you know that you are in a climate or a season where you're not getting enough sunlight, then vitamin D might be something to think about and to check for. But otherwise, we really should only be looking at a supplement if we're aware that our levels are low, or if we know there's something that is, specifically lacking in the diet that would require supplementation.
Okay, because you see on social media that you need the fiber supplement and the magnesium supplement and the vitamin D and the vitamin B complex. And at that point, you have a counter full of pills.
That's right. And as I said, I mean, magnesium-rich foods are abundant. So it's very, assuming you're eating a healthy diet, you're not magnesium deficient. And vitamin D is one of those examples where if you are deficient, then a supplement can absolutely be helpful. But if you can just get a little bit of sunlight every day, then you're probably fine. And you also need to be mindful of levels that are too high, because too high is not good either.
So one of the things I wanted to talk about before we end our conversation is the way that you are approaching social media. I love your social versus science posts. So what inspired you to share that series? What caused that spark?
I was really just seeing so much misinformation, and it just sort of came to me because I was realizing that I think now more than ever, women in this space are really being targeted with misinformation. And in fitness, there's always been some BS around, especially when it comes to supplements or, extreme diets. That's not new. But this idea that everything is different for women or everything changes after menopause, this is really changing the way that the people are engaging with fitness. And more people are just consuming their information on social media. And so I think it is really important that we, as much as we can, try to promote the science and try to push back on some of these narratives, because a lot of the messaging just neglects to mention the fact that the basics really, really work and they're really not very complicated. And that doesn't mean they're easy, but they're not complicated. And so unfortunately, we're just kind of living in a time where weight loss and muscle growth and exercise seem more complicated than ever.
Yeah. And I feel like the most sensational messaging is what is really getting seen. And so then, like, saying, be in a calorie deficit, eat protein, lift weights, those all seem too simple and vanilla for social media.
You're right. It gets to this point where, you must be gatekeeping, right? What's the real secret? And the truth is there isn't a real secret. And that's why it bothers me so much, because I see people wasting time and money doing things that are not going to help them reach their goals. And so instead of wasting all of this time trying this thing and that thing, and then ultimately realizing, oh, I should have just been lifting weights and in a calorie deficit, then that we could have circumvented all of that and saved some money and some time in the process.
Yeah. And I also feel like a lot of people in today's society, they want an answer and they want a fix for everything instead of, looking at behavioral patterns or eating patterns or emotional eating or what your feelings are around exercise and what your budget constraints, your bandwidth, all the things. Instead of looking at that, they're looking at, well, if I sign up for this program, then in 4 weeks, I can lose 30 pounds or I can gain 5 pounds of muscle, which one of the things that used to drive me so bonkers was people saying a pound of muscle doesn't equal a pound of fat. And it's like, no, I mean, it's a little bit more dense and it looks different under skin, but a pound is a pound is a pound.
Yeah, I think more and more we see this, as you said, kind of sensationalized messaging around extreme results, and we're impatient. And so we don't want to wait 6 months and be really consistent. We'd rather order a supplement that promises to do the work for us. And we just know that these don't exist. And if they did, they wouldn't be some secret that this influencer knows and nobody else knows. If there was some magic supplement, then it would be everywhere and there would be tons of data to support it and everyone would be talking about it. So just know that if it sounds too good to be true, it's too good to be true.
Yeah. And so which one of your social versus science posts has been the most popular or that sparked the most conversation on your social media page?
Definitely the weighted vests. People are have strong feelings about their weighted vests. And that menopause is this sort of game changer for everything. And that, a loss of estrogen is sort of to blame for everything. And I think, unfortunately, because of the way we're trying to communicate messaging online, people are also sort of misunderstanding science as a whole and the fact that we don't ever point to one single thing and say, okay, you change this and therefore that. That works in math, but it doesn't work in human physiology, because once you change one side of the equation, then you have this sort of downstream effect of many, many other changes going on because we are dynamic beings. And so I know people want simple explanations, but sometimes it's not that simple. And sometimes we don't know everything. And that's why we do science. That's why we have more data. That's why sometimes we end up changing our minds about things because we collect more and more and more data. So I think people are upset when they don't have this sort of single answer from science, but understand that it is more kind of complex and long-term than that.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I feel like a lot of women have decided that hormone replacement is the end-all be-all answer, and I just need to get an estrogen patch and progesterone and testosterone, and that will make me all better. But they're not looking at habits, exercise, nutrition, and it might move the needle a little bit. But imagine how much better you could feel if you're sleeping better and you're exercising and you're eating better. And so there's just so much. At first, there was nothing. It was a vacuum of information, and now it feels like, I don't know if people figured out they could make money off of us or what it is, but there's just been this flip where all of this information is coming at us of things we need and things we have to do, and everything's going to be fixed if you just do X, Y, Z, and it just gets really frustrating for women.
I think it is exactly that. I think it's that the perimenopause, postmenopause population is vulnerable, confused, and maybe has some disposable income. So this is the perfect target for a lot of these people and a lot of these companies. And it seems like hormone therapy is sort of becoming the new supplement because of the ways that some people are selling it online, which is just atrocious. And, you really need to make sure that it's appropriate for you. And you're probably going to have to make some adjustments along the way. And so you need to be able to see a qualified person in person in order to do that. And these are not kind of risk-free decisions. And they're also, as you say, not a solution for everything. So, hormone therapy can be an excellent solution if you are someone who has symptoms, but it's being marketed as a fat loss magic bullet, as a muscle growth magic bullet, as a kind of longevity magic bullet. And it's not, it's none of those things. And we still have a lot of work to do in terms of on the science side about really investigating long-term use of these hormone therapies and what the benefits truly are. But again, in the meantime, we know that you can lose fat and you can gain muscle by engaging in these simple behaviors on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say from personal experience, it took a year of working with my nurse practitioner to get hormones adjusted to where I was actually seeing a benefit. I saw a lot more side effects than benefit in the beginning. And then even after that year, it was like, okay, this is great for 6 months. And then now my hormones are changing again because I'm not in menopause yet. And so it's this constant moving target that you really need to be working with somebody closely to monitor so that you are doing yourself a service and not a disservice.
Right. And you don't want to be taking things that are unnecessary, because then the likelihood of the side effects or the interaction is greater. And so I think people are really doing this with testosterone now, despite a real lack of evidence to show that it's beneficial. People are claiming that all women should be on low dose testosterone, and it has some use cases where it might make sense, but it's certainly not. We don't have the data to support some of the claims that I see. And so, like I said, we're in this moment where I think that if you're peri or post menopause, you are being targeted, and you do need to critically think about the claims that you see online and try to check yourself when you're consuming this kind of extreme messaging, because being on social media is just like constantly watching commercials essentially that are aimed just at you.
Oh yeah, the algorithm is a marvelous thing, isn't it? So, if there was one message that you could leave midlife women, I know it's hard to like kind of package it into one, but if you could leave our listeners with one message, what would that be?
Prioritize your health, prioritize physical activity, prioritize a nutritious diet, and a calorie deficit is going to work if you are interested in fat loss. And try to ignore the noise. I know it can be difficult, but like I said, if it sounds extreme or like a magic fix, that is a red flag. These adaptations that we seek are going to take time, and you're going to need to be patient and be kind to yourself.
So what are some things that you're working on in the realm of research and education?
I'm very passionate about science communication for women. I'm also working on the development of some menopause, post-menopause related exercise recommendations that, hopefully will be helpful for women. And I'm very excited to see what we can learn about hormone therapy in the future, and hopefully the combination of hormone therapy and exercise, because we really don't have any data looking at the active woman who is also taking hormones. And I think as we approach the perimenopause, menopause transition, if we are physically active throughout that process, it seems like we're going to fare better in terms of how we engage in our exercise and how we maintain muscle. But if you're somebody who hasn't up until then, it's never ever too late to start. So importantly, we see people growing muscle in our lab in their 80s. So if you've never lifted weights before, like I said, it's really never too late to start.
That's fantastic news for a lot of people, because I think a lot of the women that I knew in my generation we're less active. I mean, we're in a driving society, and we sit at desks, and we're a lot more stagnant than I think we want to, let people know that we are. I feel like whenever we've traveled to Europe, my step count like quadruples, and it doesn't even feel that way. And I'm like, oh wow. I mean, I really do sit in a car or at a desk a lot more in this country than I do when I'm not here. Unless I'm at Disney World, then it's a different story. But I think that research is going to be really beneficial to a lot of women.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to adding a little bit of activity throughout the day, you're right. We have to be a lot more intentional about it if we aren't living in a big city where we're just walking all the time everywhere. And so those little things you can do, like park your car far away and make yourself walk to the grocery store. Or if you are just kind of listening to a podcast or on the phone with someone for a while, try to get outside and go for a walk. I think those sorts of things start to add up. And the more we can introduce them as small habits, the more they start to become automatic and they don't feel like that it's a huge effort.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of my things. Small habits, small changes can make a big difference, is what I tell people all the time. So, how can people find you if after they've listened to this, they're like, I need to follow her. I need to see what she's up to next. How can people find you out there in the world?
I'm on Instagram, Dr. Lauren CS1, and then I have other things sort of linked on there if you want to check it out.
Okay, awesome. I'll add that to the show notes too. If anybody wants to grab that, I'll put it as a hot link for you. And thank you so much for your time. I do feel like you've been sitting in the hot seat and I've just been like throwing darts at you with all these questions. But I feel like when I have the chance to have a conversation with an expert and kind of gather all of the things people message me or the questions girlfriends have or other moms, I just want to take advantage of the time. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.